nuances. Hello, everybody. Very excited to be with you today talking about my favorite thing and the reason Filevine is my full-time job because I started playing around in a customs editor one day and decided I just wanted to keep doing it. So, what is a customs editor? It's an advanced tool that not everybody has access to because this is the actual build that you are looking at. So, everything that you see inside of your Filevine, all of this has been done inside of the customs editor. So, we're really holding the keys to the castle here. What is important to know, a few things. A, we don't give everybody access to it because we don't want people to be able to make changes all willy-nilly. And B, it takes a lot of time to learn all of the nuances. So we're going to go through a lot of the basics, what the customs editor does, what kinds of things you can do in it, and then we're going to look at some examples of those things. So excited to get started. Now, first up, inside of our customs editor, we have different options for section types. And just to review, all of these little tabs over on the left, these are our sections. That's the vernacular. But tabs is a very popular one. If that is how you guys refer to it, I am totally on board. So just going down our list of sections, we know our activity. Everybody knows the activity feed. That is a built-in section. So while we enable this inside of the customs editor, we can't actually make any changes to it. And so I can't come in and say, I want the filter button to be over on the right-hand side instead of the left-hand side. It is what it is. So that is a built-in section. You can enable it or not, but we can't change how it looks. Other built-in sections are going to include your calendar. We can't do anything to the calendar. It is what it is. Although, of course, you do get to choose things like what you're viewing, what month you're viewing. Pro tip, I am always going to recommend that we use list view at least a couple of times. It's one of the easiest way to view the most amount of deadlines that you have coming up. A lot of people sleep on list view. Use list view. Continuing on down here, deadline chains and ad hoc deadlines. These are both built-in sections. It is what it is. You can change what the deadlines are, but you cannot change the section. Team is probably the most important built-in section because this is how we do our team assignments. This is how we say who is going to be assigned to what. And that is a different tool that we use to set up our team. But these are all examples of built-in sections that we all have access to, but we cannot necessarily change. You can also only have one of a built-in section. So we can't have two activity feeds. That would be a mess. When we do our deadline change, there's just the one section and then the ad hoc if you need it on top of that. And then, of course, we only have one team section. We're not doing that. All of the rest of our sections are custom sections. That means that we start with a name and that's it. And then we get to do anything that we want. There are a lot of standard custom sections that everybody should be pretty familiar with. Intake is one of them. Basically, everybody has an intake section of some sort, although it may be called something different. Same with case summary, damages, insurance, medicals. If you're live in Filevine, you probably have almost all of these. That said, within the custom sections, we have the opportunity to choose either a static or a collection. And this is some vocab that a lot of people get tripped up on a little bit. So to demonstrate, intake is a static section, which means that when you look at it, it's just going to be one long page of fields. Each one of these things is a field. If it's got a title, that's a field. That's our data point. So one long page is a static section. Alternatively, a collection section, let's do medicals, for example, we've got multiple items, often referred to as carts, items or carts. So in here, you're always going to know it's a collection section because you have this add an item option, as well as these filters and sorting. When you look into each individual item, you're going to see we have the same fields, so the same data points, but duplicated for multiples. Medicals is a great example because we're probably looking at a couple of different medical providers. We need the same information about all of them, and that's why we duplicate the carts. So when you're in your customs editor, we're going to get a clue as to what kind of section this is. So we've got activity and it's telling us right here, this is a built-in section, which is telling us A, we can't change it, and B, we can't make another one. Intake, custom fields, that's a custom section that got built from scratch, and so on and so forth. So when you scroll down, you'll be able to see what is a collection, what is a static, what is a built-in. So that's number 101, all of our sections inside of the customs editor, because that's where we start. What do we actually want to see over here on the left in the way that we're organizing our cases? So let's look at a built-in section, activity, for example. There's not a lot that we can do here. We can change the name of the section and we can put an internal note in it if we want to. The internal notes are only for people who are going to be accessing the customs editor. This is not front-facing. So this is just notes for us admins who are in the backend doing all of our building and editing and customizing. And that is it. Oh, also you can change the icon, which I very much suggest that people do just because it's a tiny little spark of joy in my day. There are a lot of icons to choose from and some of them are very silly, like a bunny. I don't know what people are using the bunny for. If you guys are using the bunny, shout it out in the chat because I would love to see it. After our built-in sections, let's look at intake. Intake is a static custom section. So again, we can change that name and the icon anytime that we want to. We can change the visibility. Right now, intake is always visible. So no matter what, in every single project, everybody sees the intake all the time, and you can't change it. We could set it to always hidden. Maybe this is something that we're not using anymore, but we want to retain the data that's in there. We can change it to always hidden so nobody can ever see it, ever, no matter what, unless, of course, they come into the editor and change it. Initially visible and hidden, you can probably keep up, is going to tell you what happens when a project is created. So if it's initially visible, whenever a project is created, we're going to see it, but we can hide it if we want to, and vice versa. If we open up a project and it's initially hidden, nobody can see it, but you can turn it on. Important note on section visibility. Only project admins can change what sections are visible. So if it's initially visible or initially hidden and we want to make it the other one, only a project admin can do that, not a collaborator. And that is a very on-purpose permission because, again, we want to make sure that the people who are leading that case, who are assigned to the case, have full control over what we're seeing in our case management. The section type is custom. So again, custom versus built-in, this is a custom. Once you make it, you can't change it. So if I made an intake and actually realized I wanted to make an activity section, I can't just change it to activity. It doesn't make any sense. That's not how the pieces work together. So this is just telling us what it is. We cannot change it after the fact. Protected section, relatively new, very exciting Filevine update. Depending on what kind of section you have and who is going to have access to it, you may want to make it a protected section, and this is where you do it. Inside of your org setup, when you're going through all of your members and your teams, you can give someone permission to view protected sections. You can give someone permission to edit protected sections, or you can hide it entirely. So let's say, for example, we've got an intern working on a project at our firm. They don't need to see all of our settlement data. We don't want them knowing what we're settling cases for. So we make that a protected section and interns cannot view them. That would be one use case example of what we're using protected sections for. So the customs editor is where you say whether or not it's going to be protected. And then in your org setup, that's where you're going to say who can actually see it. After this, our custom section setup, we do not have anything here because that is only for collection sections, and we're going to look at that in a little bit. But it is still telling us you can't do it because it's not a collection. That way, when you're trying to find it, you don't feel like a crazy person because it's just disappeared and it's not in the place you know it is. So we love a helpful hint. And then after here, we've got custom fields and widgets. It's not letting me add any right now because I turned on this require permissions. Anytime you make an update like this, it's going to say, hey, are you sure before you start doing other stuff and getting distracted? Are you sure? So I'm going to turn this back off because I'm not actually going to be doing that. We're going to keep it as always visible. I'm going to save that. And now we can see all of our fields. First thing it's going to say is custom fields and widgets, and we're going to talk about those two in a little bit right after we review collection section items. But what we're looking at right now is all of the individual data points that exist in that intake section. And learning to read the customs editor is a little bit of an art. I love it. I tell my boyfriend a lot, it's kind of like how you play video games on a lot of different systems. You have to learn how the controllers work. I can't do that. It's like learning another language. The customs editor is like learning another language, and it's very fun. I am, just considering myself bilingual because I can do it. I also say for any of my millennials, if you spend any time doing a MySpace, a Zynga, a WordPress, you can learn the customs editor because we already have those skills. Now, let's look at one of our collection sections. If I scroll down, it's going to tell me, boom, insurance, that's a collection section. But since we were looking at medicals, I'm going to open that one up. So we've got our medicals name, our icon, very good one, good choice for medicals, our section visibility, our internal notes. This is a really good one for us when we're coming in. So if we're looking for our LOPs, we can see right here, this is where they're at. You don't have to search for them. We love that. It is a custom type, collection section custom. Remember, collection is whether it's a static one page or a duplicated data. And it's a custom because it's not one of the built-ins like activity, calendar, team. Again, you can require permission. And now we come to our collection section setup. I really like the collection section setup, and a lot of people miss it because it's grayed out and you have to enable it to be able to see what they are. But this is something that we can leverage really powerfully. So I'm going to click on Show Collection Options, and now it's giving me a bunch of different things that I can do, which are so fun, and everybody should do them all the time. The easiest ones, what's the default sort field? So when you're looking at your collection section, your medicals, for example, how do we want it to be sorted? Very popular is going to be by created date. So the most recent created one is going to come up at the top, and then it's going to go chronologically. But we have other options. We can choose almost any field that exists inside of this section as our sorting. Maybe you want to go alphabetical by provider. Maybe you want to go by what the balance is, the original balance of that medical provider. How do you want it to be sorted initially when someone comes into this section? You can change it when you go in. If you've ever gone into your collection sections, you know that we have that sorting option. So you can choose whatever you want on the front end, but on the back end, we're going to say, what's the best for my users? Similarly, once you choose what it is, you're going to get the ascending, descending. So if you've ever sorted anything in Excel, it's going to look very similar. These left and right main fields are one of my favorite things, especially when we've got sections that have a currency field in them. Expenses is a really good example, as well as our medicals and our liens. So we can see in this one, our right main field is the final balance due. And then we've got this additional checkbox, do we want to show a total? Now that total is only going to come up if we have chosen something that can have a total. So over here on our left main field, we've got provider. There is no total for that. We can't add words, so we don't have that option, but we do have it for the final balance due. So let's look at what these things look like on the front end.
And
In our
Val,
medical,
there is a question, I'm sorry.
oh, go ahead.
If you place information into a collection section, can you get the information out into a template?
Out into a template, like a document template? Yes, sort of. Collection section templates have to be built inside of that collection section. We might see, for example, in intake, a template for a welcome letter. That one's pretty easy. It's pulling in your client details, maybe your date of incident, your case type, etc. In a collection section in medicals, for example, we might be sending out a medical records request. The DocGen, the button to create that template, has to be inside of the medical section so that we can pull out the provider is the Hulk, our dates of treatment, our balances, whatever it is that we're putting into that template. So yes, you can 100% pull it out into a template as long as the button is in the collection section. If I put a medical records template into intake, I would not be able to pull in that provider because we can't tell the DocGen which one of those cards we're pulling from. So yes.
And you can only pull from one card. So it's only going to pull one provider's information into there. If you want to include another provider, you'd have to go to that card, generate that DocGen. Now, there are some like workarounds to that. If you purchase Outlaw, you can pull from any collection section and anything like that. So if that's something that you're interested in, feel free to shoot us an email. We can give you a demo of that product.
For templates that are created outside of the collection section, you have a couple of options. So like, for example, we've got our final balance due. If I had a template inside of intake or some other section anywhere else inside of Filevine but medicals, I'd be able to pull in like the total final balance due for all of them, or the most recent one. Very specific things allowed for collection sections outside of it.
Yeah, it's like the same things you can pull into your vitals. So if you're
Exactly.
familiar with what you can pull into your vitals, yep, Or reports, yeah.
Whichever one you use the most. I always reference reports thinking that other people run reports as much as I do. I am an Excel nerd and I realize that I am in a minority. So inside of our collection section, if we're not looking at a specific card, we're just looking at all of them. You can see in our left side, we've got our provider, and in our right side, we've got our final balance due. And then there's that total up there at the top. And these are the settings that we just looked at inside of that customs editor. So if I wanted to filter this, I want to say provider, the Hulk. Now my list is updated, so I only have one card visible, and my total has updated for just the ones that I can see. And you can see this tiny little star next to it, that little blue star, that's indicating to us that this is the amount total for what we are currently viewing, not for all of them. Additional options for our collection section is the export setup. And this is so fun and everybody should do it. And very few people do it because it's so hidden and you have to find it. And don't feel bad if you didn't know that it was here because I was in a customs editor for about 1.5 years before I made my first collection export. So this is your opportunity to level up. What this is giving us is an opportunity to use a report in that collection section without actually having to run the report. So you can see why I like it so much. What we've done here is created a report of our medicals with different data points that we want to see when we're running our medicals report. So inside of our actual section, we've got this tiny little Excel button so that we can export that report right now without having to go into our report builder. And it's going to show you the medicals for this project. Great, great, great tool. Also very helpful for your expenses. I've seen a lot of people using an expense export for like sending to their bookkeeper. We need to do our 3-way rec of our client cost accounts, for example. Lots of options that you can do there. We do also have the print button, which can get a little dicey sometimes, but is very convenient if you do want to just print out all of the things that you have there. I don't recommend it, do a report, but you can if you need to. So those are all of our collection section options. Open it up one day, see what you can get. It's really going to make your collection section experience a lot more fun. Important note, right now I've got this, let's remove my filter. I've got this little box here selected. So this is our view of the collection section. If I change it to the middle one, we're going to have our cards be a little bit bigger so we can see a little bit more information. Or if we change it to the many lines, we're going to squish it down. And you can guess that this is my favorite view because it is most similar to Excel. And that's how I live my life. But when I have it in the very, very condensed view, I no longer have the left and right sides of my cards because it's just a line, not an actual card. And I no longer have that total amount. So if you're not seeing your total, even though it's enabled inside of your customs editor, just change your view to one of these two and it'll show up. There is also a possibility that it won't show up because there's like no dollar amount, but it should show you 0, not a blank. Now, let's talk about some fields. And we're going to stay here in our medical section because I like it. What we see right now is actually a lot of stuff. So first of all, we see the name of every single field. That's going to be your black bold at the top, provider, date, etc. In the parentheses, it's telling us what type of field or widget it is. And then over here on the right, it's telling us the location. So this first set of brackets is telling me that this field is on the first row in the leftmost position. 0 is the leftmost position it can be in. Anything that comes after that is going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. Pro tip, you can skip numbers if you need to. So if you delete something, you don't have to turn everything back. If I had something on row 1 in position 1 and row 1 and position 2, and I decide to delete the 1 in position 1, the 1 in position 2 can just stay the way that it is and it'll be fine. Once we click it open, we're going to get more information. This one is an instructions widget. So we can see the widget name, the widget selector, which is a very specific thing for like docgens, and then the actual text of this instruction because it's an instruction type, as well as some properties. What row, what order in the row, visibility, which can be a lot of different things, and then locked and obsolete, which are very specific things, but we're going to look at those in just a second. So just scrolling through here, I can see a lot of different things about what my fields are, what kind of fields they are, and where they're at. And again, it does take some time to get used to looking at things like this. So let's say I'm new to the customs editor and this looks crazy to me. I can't interpret this at all. It's too many things to look at and it's too much scrolling. I'm going to come all the way up to the top. I'm going to click on this little X so it goes away. And instead, I'm going to click on this eyeball, which is going to give me a preview. Anytime, and I do mean anytime I am doing edits in a build, I will always use this preview to look at it. The reason that I like the preview is because it's going to show you all of the things that are hidden. So for example, you might have a question like this. Is this a lien or a letter of protection? Yes or no? If this only shows up when you hit yes, I'm going to see it no matter what in my preview. And that's really helpful for me because if I'm doing a big build and there's a lot of contingent visibility, I don't want to have to go through and click yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no to figure out what fields are hidden. Best use case for this is going to be case summary, especially if you've got a lot of different case types. So if you select a case type, here's 30 fields, and you select a different case type, here's 30 fields. I do not have time to be doing that. So I'm going to come into my preview and just see all of it. Where is it? What am I looking for? What am I missing? I really encourage everybody who has gotten a template from somebody like Find Skills to use your preview button. It's going to give you a lot of information about things that you might have forgotten that you even have. I just had this conversation with somebody this morning. She had no idea that there was an option for her to put in a summary and an upload for her autopsy because there were so many visibilities to get there, she didn't even know the field was there. So everybody who has access to your customs editor, go in and click on your eyeball and see if there are things that you did not know were available because you didn't click enough yeses. So what this is giving me is just, kind of a pretend version of what it might look like. We can't do stuff in here. I can click some stuff, I can look at my drop downs and things, but I can't actually edit any of the information in my projects. It's just a preview. As you scroll down, you'll notice it's no longer telling us what kind of field type it is, but we can guess, especially when it gives us help. So for example, we see this blue arrow. This is a URL, and I can guess that because it's got a URL pinned in there. I know that this is a currency field because it starts with $1. So this is a dollar amount field and so on. If it says add files, you can bet that that is a file upload field. So can't emphasize it enough. Preview in your customs editor is going to save you a whole lot of time when you have to do an edit. It also makes it a lot easier to figure out where a field is supposed to be as you're learning to read those numbers. What line is it? What row is it? So for example, in this row, I can see this is probably 0, 1, 2, and 3. So I often will have it side by side, my regular customs editor on one side, my preview on another side, and then an actual project over on a different screen. So as I'm editing them, I have all three of those very helpful views. If you're working off of one screen, you have my sympathies. You're just going to have to tab through those a bunch of times, but you're strong and I believe in you. Now, let's talk about different field types. We're going to move back into a static section. Hello, intake. I love you. So immediately we can see instructions, action button, a date, a person, a drop-down list, currency, file attachment, subsection headers. So there's a lot going on here. If you were to ask me to list every single kind of field and widget off the top of my head, I would not be able to do it. So don't feel like that's a thing you have to do. As long as you're familiar with it and you're inside the customs editor, you're going to have all of those. You do not need to memorize all of this. And it comes in time. So let's say I wanted to make a new field. By default, it's going to be a field option because that's what we're using the most. We're using fields. Fields include a lot of different options. We've got amounts, specific amounts, calculated numbers, currency, decimal percentage. So if we're doing a lot of calculations, maybe in a settlement section about fees and percentages, this is what we would use. Start with the amounts and then make a calculated one. Case number is a very specific thing. Don't use that. Just don't. If you need to use it, someone from Filevine or a partner who's doing an implementation will help you. But a case number is a very specific thing if for some reason you cannot use your project ID, but don't do that. A date is just a date. It doesn't do anything, one static date. And a very popular question that we get all the time is whether or not dates are going to go into your calendar. And they are not. It's just one field living in a section with a date filled in, and it stays right there. It's not going in your calendar. Deadline with reminders is going to be that due done field. So what day is it due and what day is it done? This is our only field that has two parts, and you're going to see them next to each other. It's also going to give you the date on your calendar and reminders when that date is coming up. Really popular one that we see all the time is going to be your statute of limitations. Your statute of limitations due is going to be your SOL. Your statute of limitations done is going to be the date that it's filed. And then you set up a reminder schedule so that every time that SOL is coming up in your project, you get those notifications that the date is coming. And again, it will be on your calendar. A drop-down list is exactly what it sounds like. Click on it, see a bunch of options. File attachment, very important, is a single file upload. And I want to really emphasize that because we also have the multiple file attachments list. And this is a trap that I fell into personally, so I am very much speaking from experience. If you are not 100% certain that no matter what, there will only be one document uploaded, use a multiple file attachment. The trap that I fell into was in expenses. I put in a single file upload, and then we found out that we needed to also include the receipt after payment and notes from an expert. And then we had to add a whole new field because I could only put in the invoice. So, cautionary tale, I am always going to suggest a multiple file attachments unless you are absolutely sure there will never be a scenario where you need more than one.
Yeah, it's almost better just to never use the single
I
file
never
attachment
used it.
because it gives you that cushion, right? So you can be 100% certain, but
Still
instead of,
don't.
yeah, still don't just use the
Still
multiple
don't.
file attachment. You can't make any changes to most of these fields once they've been created. And so that's why it's really important to be specific and to also have some
Yeah.
forethought
Yes,
to be
what's
using
going to
those
happen.
fields for.
Mhm. Continuing our incident date, that's going to be a very, very specific field type. It does a very special thing. If you put an incident date field type anywhere in Filevine, you can make another one anywhere else in Filevine, and they're going to talk to each other. So if you have an incident date field, when you update this one, the other one will also update and vice versa. And you can do that as many times as you want. This is really nice for a lot of people who want to have their incident dates in different places. It's also very important to know that if you change one, the others will all change. So there's a little bit of a risk factor there. So powerful tool, very risky. I'm not saying don't use it. I'm saying make sure every single person in your org knows what it is if you have it.
Filevine did just release reference fields.
Yeah,
So
they
that
did.
might be, if you're worried about the incident date being changed in other sections, you might be
Mhm.
able to get away with using reference fields. I haven't tried that, Val. I don't know if you have for incident
Well,
date, but
I am doing it
um,
right now.
okay. So it
It
is
is
a
a lot of fun.
possibility. The reference fields you can't change in the other sections. You're just able to view the data. You don't see it. Oh, we do have it in our drop-down
We
list.
do.
You all might not have it in yours, but it should be coming soon. And so you can, still have data show in other sections without having to worry about it being editable in all of those sections.
Next down, let's see. Is there a way to calculate a field off of a date? Example, I file a complaint and I want to calculate the number of days since filing relative to today. Unfortunately, no. We do love Excel for that. That is something that I do quite a bit in reporting for clients, but Filevine unfortunately will not allow us to calculate from a date, just currency amounts, decimals, numbers, and percentages. Great question though, and I will put in a plug as I always do. Navigate to your help icon, share your feedback, and give that suggestion to Filevine because they do listen to you. Most of the feedback that goes into this is considered within, I think, like 30 days. And the vast majority of the updates that Filevine pushes out have been requested by customers. So great question. go ahead and put that in a suggestion and Filevine will consider it. Probably a bunch of people have already asked for it. Now, next down our list is a multi-select list, which is different from a drop-down in that you can select multiple items. So that's going to be our checkboxes. Example, maybe you have a list of injuries. Options will be left arm, left leg, right leg. Maybe they injured all 4 of them. So we want to have a multi-select as opposed to a drop-down, which would just be the one. A person is going to be a single contact card. That's just going to be one person, as opposed to a person list where you can put multiple contact cards. Now, this is going to be the opposite for me of the file uploads, and that is specifically because of document templates. A document template can pull out any of the information inside of a single person's contact card. Once you get into a person list, the docgens start to get a little messy, a little hairy. You've got a lot of limitations when you're pulling information from a person list. So be very sure that you actually want to use a person list, because you might end up with some very nasty docgens not doing what you want. A project link and a project link list. This is going to be a really easy way for you to reference another project. So just like when you're putting a person into a person card, you type in their name and it finds them, and then you have your card. It's going to do the same thing for a project, which is super helpful for a lot of people. At my firm, I had an accounting project where we were tracking a lot of settlement information and things like that. So I used a project field to be able to reference what settlement it came from. Super great. 10 out of 10, recommend. Reference field, which we just talked about, is a brand new update, and hopefully everybody has it right now, if just to play with. And this is one of those things that people put into that request feedback to Filevine over and over and over again, because they saw what the intake field could do, and we want to do it for a lot of other things. So the way that reference fields work, we start with one of these other field types somewhere inside of Filevine, and then we will reference it in multiple different places. So let's say, for example, you want to see your case type in a bunch of different sections. You have it in intake, you have it in case summary, maybe you have an evaluation section for case projections. You want to see it in a bunch of places. Intake probably is going to be your main one. That's the first field that gets filled out during that intake process when you're seeing what kind of case it is. And then we'll make a reference field in case summary and case evaluation and projections. And they're all going to mirror what that original field does. The new fields, the reference fields, are not editable. They're just showing you what the initial field shows. So you don't have to do many drop downs, and then you don't have to update all of those drop downs every time something changes. You know, maybe something started out as in, I don't know, I have a terrible use case for case case type. But if you do have to change something, the instant date is a really great example. Maybe we made a typo. We don't have to go around changing a whole bunch of stuff. We just change it one time. Reference fields are a really, really powerful tool that has just come out, and we're all learning together different opportunities that we can use them for. A reference field can be anything that you pull into a vital or anything that you can pull into a report. And that includes things like deadline chains, which is what a lot of our clients are doing right now, referencing the next due date, referencing an SOL from a deadline chain, referencing a litigation deadline chain. Very fun. You can do it with all kinds of data, and it's my favorite thing that has ever happened, probably ever. I mean, like in Filevine. I'm not crazy. Now we go into our text field types. Multiple lines is what it sounds like versus a single line, small, big. And then you've got multiple lines, large, which truly I've never seen a good one. It takes up a huge amount of your page. If you do for some reason need a very, very long narrative that you're writing inside of Filevine, you're going to use that large one, but it is very big. And then we have our URLs and our URL list. URL fields are very fun because they have that blue arrow that we saw a little bit ago. So when you put the URL in, all you have to do is click that blue arrow and it's going to open it up for you, which I love. Also, if we click on this, it's going to tell you what the prompt is. And this I want to be very clear about because it's going to be a field with a name that says like link to Filevine. And then when I come into a project, I type in www.filevine.com. So it's not going to be the same URL everywhere. Another instance that I've seen people use URL fields for, if you do a lot of like diagrams of an incident, I've seen people put in a link to like a Google Earth image of an intersection for an MVA. Very cool. We love that. So it's going to have the same name, link to Google Earth, but of course the URL is going to be different every time. So very, very clear on what a URL field is. You give it a name, but somebody else on the front end is actually putting in what it is. URL list is going to give you many URLs. Oh, I accidentally made bubbles. Okay, Zoom. And then a yes, no, we see these all over the place, answering a question, yes, no, unknown. So top to bottom, that is all of the field types. Some of them can be updated, but as Jasmine said, many of them cannot. So for example, if I look here in this incident type dropdown, I cannot change this field type no matter what. So just like when you set what kind of section something is, you can't change it. For most of our fields, that's going to be the same. If, however, I look at a single line text, I do have the option to change this. I can change it to multiple lines, large lines, or a single URL, which is very helpful. Maybe you just made it accidentally as a text box because that's our default field type, and actually you want it to be a clickable URL. So most of them, again, cannot be changed. Some of them give you a few different options, but like that single file upload, you cannot change it to a multiple file upload. And that is how I ended up with 3 extra fields in my expenses section. Now, alternatively, we're going to look at our widgets. Widgets do so many things and they're very fun. I'm going to start from the bottom and work my way up on this one. Subsection header is something that a lot of people don't use a whole lot, and they should. This table of contents here is coming from our subsection headers. And if you've never noticed the table of contents, that's okay, because it took us a long time. If I click on any of these, it's going to take me to where that subsection header is. So I don't want to scroll all the way down to my wrap up. I'm just going to click on this, and it's going to take me all the way down. The subsection header widget is the only thing that will do that for you. You have to set that subsection widget to be able to have that clickable contents. The next widget types are going to be report fusions. Report fusions, when they're done, look a little bit like DocGens. They use reports to figure out what data points we're going to be using, and then it turns it into either a Word document or an Excel document. Very complicated to do, very fun to learn, but it is long. It is a long process getting report fusions done. But if you want to have a report fusion, it has to have a field somewhere inside of Filevine so that you can click it to run that fusion, do all of the formatting magic and all of the fun things. An Outlaw template is only applicable if you have an Outlaw account, and that's going to be for those complicated DocGens that we can't do, like if you're pulling from multiple different medicals cards and you need to get document assembly, your Outlaw widget is going to be the thing that gets you there. Instructions can be a bunch of things. I love instruction fields. They're so ridiculously helpful. If we look inside of our customs editor, there are a lot of instructions here, but they might not necessarily be doing what you think they're doing, which is giving instructions. This one, intake instructions, looks a little bit silly. So it says intake instructions, and then it's got these 2 hyphens underneath it. Why do we have hyphens? This is Filevine formatting, and everybody should learn Filevine formatting because you can also use it inside the activity feed in like notes and comments. Very fun. So if we look inside our actual intake section, that is right here, intake instructions. So those 2 hyphens underneath it are making it a header, a little bit bigger, bold, fun. We love that. So I was able to come in and have this pseudo header without adding it into our table of contents because I don't need it there. If we look at our next set of instructions, damages, complete the damages section, we've got some underscores as well as some options. If we look over here, we can see that we've got a bolded header and then a bullet point list. So if you've ever wondered how to make bullet points inside of Filevine, it is this. Important note though, in a text box, so if we put in a field type text box, you cannot use the formatting as you are typing. You can only use the formatting in instruction widgets in notes or tasks in the activity feed, and something else that I'm forgetting. Task flows. Nailed it. Continuing on, we've got action buttons. And the action buttons are the things that you're going to see the most. Oh, also docgens, sorry. Docgens are what you think they are. They generate the templates that we code using the field selectors. But the action buttons do so many things that we have an additional drop down when we select it. So what kind of action buttons do we have? A link button, a send email button, and most popular, the task flow trigger button. Where can we find formatting information? What characters do what?
I'll put it in the chat for you.
Thank you. I switched to a new computer and I lost all my bookmarks. It's a terrible day. So a link button, very important. So I told you a URL field is just a field where you type in what the URL is, and then when you click the arrow, it'll take you there. A link button is the one that will give you the exact same link every single project. When you put it in there, every single project will have the same button that will take you somewhere else. Also important for a link button, and this is me mostly just begging, if you make a link button, please click open in a new tab. Absolutely nobody wants to click on a link in Filevine and have it open up in the same tab and then have to go back to Filevine. It is the worst. And that is going to be my best practice recommendation for all people, always, always open it in a new tab. It makes people really mad. Again, speaking from experience. And this is another one where you get to pick what the button icon is going to be. Always fun. The other action buttons are going to be your send email and your task flow trigger. Send email is a lot of fun, but a lot of people get a little bit confused about it. If you use a send email button, it's not going to send it from Filevine. What it's going to do is make a templated email for you that opens in your computer's email client. So most popular, we have Outlook. If you have Outlook and you use the send email button, it's going to write the email for you, and then it'll open it up into Outlook so that you can send it. We love the send email button because we can use field replacement codes, just like in document templates. So if you've got a lot of form emails that you're sending, for example, a follow-up to an adjuster, we're not going to keep typing it over and over again. It says all the same words. So we're just going to use a send email button, which will pull in the adjuster's name, the adjuster's email. You can have it CC the project by default so that you don't have to remember to do that. And you can pull in any field that you could pull in a docgen or in a report. Claim number, insurer, who is the insured, etc. So it's very, very, very convenient for a lot of different firms and a lot of different case types. Any emails that you send that are basically the exact same thing except your client's name, use a send email button. And then last and most popular is our task flow trigger button. So task flows, we probably all know, can either be triggered from a phase or from a button. This is where you make the button. And it's important to know that this is where you make the button because you have to have a button first before you can make the task flow. And sometimes people will ask like if they need extra permission to be able to do the task flow. No, you just have to make this button first. You can call it whatever you want. You can pick what icon it's going to have. As soon as this button is created, I can go into my task flow tool and start building what tasks we need, who they're assigned to, and so on. So these are all of our action buttons. These are all of our widget types and our field types. Now, before we wrap, I want to go over our advanced properties a little bit. So we talked about rows and orders. That's going to be physically where are we seeing it on our page. If I want 4 things to be on one row, I'm going to put them all in, for example, row 26, and then their order 0, 1, 2, 3. If that makes you uncomfortable, you are free to start things at 1 and do 1, 2, 3, 4, but Filevine by default is going to start every row at 0. The visibility works differently than it does for sections. So by default, it's always going to say show always, because most of the time that's going to be true. You can set this by field. So this one, for example, let's say I only want to show it when the incident type, oh, I don't actually know what incidents we have in here. Let's say is a dog bite. So we have options here, equals, not equals, contains, not contains. And like mostly it's pretty obvious what those mean, but there are things that you have to keep in mind. If you use equals or not equals, that is a caps sensitive exact match. So if I said when incident type equals dog bite, I will never see this field because there are no options that have all lowercase dog type. If I change this to contains, that'll work and I'll be fine. So mostly pro tip, use contains. Unless you absolutely have to have a total exact match, contains is probably going to get you there with way less room for error. Same thing for a yes, no field. If I'm making something contingent based on something saying yes or no, if you make it all lowercase yeses, it will not work. So even for those where it's just 2 or 3 letters, I'm still going to use contains just in case I forget to use a capital Y. We could also do the opposite. Maybe I want to see this field for every single case type except dog bite. We would just change the contingency based on that field. That way we don't have to say like visible if this and this and this and this, which Filevine unfortunately cannot do, one or the other. And then again, up at the top, we can do hide instead. So maybe I want to say, we're going to hide this every single time incident type contains dog bite. That is the exact same thing as showing it when it does not contain dog bite. So it's very specific use cases. A lot of it is what makes the most sense in your brain. And to be fair, I have had to do this multiple times to make sure that what I'm telling Filevine to do is what is actually happening. And then last up is these checkboxes. So required, locked, and obsolete. And they do have these little question marks in case you forget what they are, which is super helpful, especially if you are new to the customs editor. So a required field has to be completed before a page can be saved. We're probably familiar with required fields, but I will caution you, sometimes required fields are a terrible idea. I saw a client who had their date of incident required, and they were only using Filevine for their intake procedures. So it made their intake really hard because if you have, for example, a decedent case, someone has died and we're speaking to their maybe daughter, and they don't know the exact date of death. You can't save anything inside of the intake section until we have that incident date filled out. And that made it really hard. The trap that a lot of people fall into is requiring fields that you absolutely have to have. But if we don't have that information initially, people are going to have to put in fake information or just not save it at all. And both of those things are terrible. So we only make a field required if you know for a fact they're going to be able to answer it at any time once they open that section up. Locked is a field that can only be edited by a project admin. So if you're a collaborator, you can see what it says, but you can't change anything about it. I see this a lot in firms who have HR project types. So maybe you have an HR project for every single employee and you have like what their compensation amount is. We do not want our employees to be able to come in and change what their compensation amount is. That's bad news bears. It's very unlikely that anybody would be that bold to try and make Filevine fight with your payroll software, but still, don't give people the opportunity to do it. There are tons of different reasons you might have a locked field that only an admin has the ability to change. And then finally, obsolete. I don't have that as an option right now because this is a brand new field. An obsolete field is something that we don't need anymore, but we can't remove it because it's been used. If you make a field obsolete, it's still going to show up every single time it's been used in a project, but if there's no data in it, it disappears. So this is very, very helpful for us. For example, my single file upload in expenses, I did make that obsolete so that moving forward, everyone was using that multiple file upload. And then it just disappeared and we didn't have to remember my mistakes. And then lastly, we've got our internal notes, just like our sections. And we should always, again, always, not a suggestion, put into our notes when we have contingent visibility. So for this one, for example, show when incident type does not contain dog bite. And let's give this a name. Now, the reason that we want to put that into our instructions is to be kind to our fellow admins. Just scrolling down, you can see how many of these fields are contingent based on something else. Very typical to see in an intake section, especially if you have a whole bunch of different case types. So if we have these internal notes in here and I'm looking and I'm trying to figure out why this field won't show up, what's happening, some very, very kind, wonderful Filevine admin has already told me ahead of time it's not showing up because the incident type doesn't contain dog bite. And this is something that if you come into a section like this with tons and tons and tons of visibility and you want to say, hey, what are all of the fields that show up if an incident type is dog bite? I don't want to have to click every single field open to read their internal notes, especially because it's an extra click to get those advanced properties to show up. I don't have time for that. That's not fun. So anytime you are making any updates in your customs editor with custom visibility, put it in the internal notes to be nice to you and anybody else who might be coming in to build after you. And the last thing that I'm going to tell you guys about the customs editor, let's say in here, we've got our intake, we've got our instructions, we've got an action button. I want to come into this intake section and put something in between the intake instructions and the damages instruction. We've got row number 1 and row number 7. That is very much on purpose in most of our builds to give you that buffer inside of that space. So I can add something in row 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, and it will appear in between those two rows. If we have a situation where I've got this damages instruction in row 7 and a different set of instructions in row 8, and I want something in between those, I do not have to go through all of these hundreds of fields and change them all. I'm just going to click on this little arrow here, and every single one of these fields has now moved down a row, so I can put something in row 8 that will go in between these two things. Now you'll notice this intake instructions and complete the damages section. There's nothing in between them. It's one right after the other. So even though this is row 1 and this is row 7, it's not going to create a huge gap. If there's nothing in there, it's just going to condense it down to a regular gap. Once we start putting stuff in, it'll start expanding, but it's totally fine if your rows are not consecutive. You do not have to do that. As long as you know this one comes after this one, you're fine. And that
And
is
you
custom
can't,
editor. Go ahead.
sorry, I was going to say, for the actual row that the items are in, you can't use the arrow, unfortunately, to push down. So if you see we have 9, 9, 1, 9, 2, if you try to press on 9, 1 to go down, it's going to push the entire ninth row down another level. So you do have to go into those individually to make changes to how those are set up. And then as far as the visibility, to hop back to that, my apologies. You were talking about the conditional values. If you have a build like ours, or maybe even in your build, you may see special characters listed next to some of the options because there is only one visibility option. So you saw I can only show when dog bite is selected, but I might need that same field to show for motor vehicle collision and premise liability. And so we use special characters in order to allow or to cheat the system really to
Yeah.
show that field in all of those situations. So if you find yourself trying to figure out how to get this one field to show multiple times, but you don't want to create it 3 different times, especially because in Customs Editor, each field within that section has to have a unique name. You can use special characters to kind of get around that. And then for obsolete fields, it's great to be able to use them, but you don't want to go crazy and
I'll go crazy.
obsolete a ton of fields. It will slow your system down. And you also have a cap on the number of fields you can have within a section. If you find yourself seeing issues with slowness because you know you have a lot of obsolete fields, feel free to reach out to us. We do offer services to clean up some of those obsolete fields for you. We do have support plans, and we also offer free audits. So our audit team can kind of go through, let you know what the issues are, and then we can work with you. We're a month-to-month service. So if you all ever need, our help with anything, again, on a month-to-month basis, you can say, hey, we want to work with you for 2 months, pause, come back 5 months later, whatever you need, we're here to kind of help.
And the obsolete fields is so real. I have seen a lot of excruciatingly slow report builders. So if you are not running reports because your report builder is taking 5 minutes to load, probably you have too many obsolete fields. So, let's talk about it.
Awesome. Well, I don't see any other questions. Thank you so much, Val. As always, um, thanks, Trina. If you all ever need anything, feel free to reach out to us. We hope to see you in a future free help session. I think we maybe have one more this year before we kind of wrap up the year, but we'll be back in January to kick things off. If you do have suggestions on topics that you want to see, feel free to reach out. We'll definitely get those added to our kind of list in our rotation for you all as well. And again, you'll be able to find this recording on our website. Perfect.
All right,
Thanks so
everybody.
much
A
again,
lot of
Val.
fun.
Have
Thank
a
you.
good one.
Bye.
Bye.